Hare Krishna, everyone. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue our discussion on the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. We'll start with Kirtan. Nama Om Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Jai Jai Prabhupada. Shri Shankar Gaurari ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada ki Jai, Shri Shankar Gaurari. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. ज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। नमः ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमति भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामी नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी वस्त्राग्रशधारिणे. So today we're going to discuss the third chapter of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. This is a book by Srila Prabhupada that is based on the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is the biography of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We'll try and go into the teachings, pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, so that we can appreciate and appreciate him better and deepen our love for him. So this third chapter is called Teachings to Sanatana Goswami. And we'll start with the invocation, which is verse 18 of the first chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Glory to Sri Chaitanya and Nityananda. Glory to Advaita Chandra. And glory to all the devotees of Sri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So last week, the chapter was on how Lord Chaitanya and Sanatana Goswami met again. This time after Sanatana Goswami had relieved himself of his material responsibilities, and he also relinquished all his material attachments. So Lord Chaitanya was pleased to impart transcendental knowledge to him. Today we're going to discuss the questions that Sanatana Goswami asked Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the wonderful answers that the Lord gave him. Srila Prabhupada says, from the instructions of Lord Chaitanya to Sanatana Goswami, we can understand the science of God as it relates to God's transcendental form, his opulences, and his devotional service. Indeed, everything will be explained to Sanatana Goswami by the Lord himself. First, Sanatana fell at the feet of the Lord and with great humility asked about his own identity. I was born in a lower family, Sanatana said. My associations are all abominable, and I am fallen, the most wretched of mankind. I was suffering in the dark well of material enjoyment, and I never learned the actual goal of my life. Indeed, I do not even know what is beneficial for me. Although in the mundane sphere I am what is known as a greatly learned man, I am in fact such a fool that I also think I am learned. You have accepted me as your servant, and you have delivered me from the entanglement of material life. Now please tell me what my duty in this liberated state. Now please tell me what my duty is in this liberated state. So this is a very famous statement of Sanatana Goswami's that is oft quoted for its salient truth. Sanatana Goswami is actually taking the position of all of us in stating what the conditioned soul generally undergoes. The conditioned soul is thinking because of their high position, because of their glorification by others, that they're actually learned, that they're actually able to understand who they really are. But the reality is that the the more educated we seem to be, the more resistant we are to hearing that we actually don't know how it is. Sanatana Goswami himself was very materially educated. He was occupying very prestigious position. And in addition to that, he was also spiritually qualified. He was a Brahmin by birth and also by his activities. But he is saying to Lord Chaitanya in great humility, Kyami, who am I? He's admitting that despite all of his qualifications, he doesn't know who he is. So until we can also get over this restriction of pride that holds us back from approaching spiritual authorities with humility, we'll never be able to understand our real identity. This humility is very important. The Prabhupada continues. From this plea, we can understand that liberation is not the final word of perfection. There must be activities in liberation. Sanatana clearly says, you have saved me from the entanglement of material existence. Now, after liberation, what is my duty? Kindly explain it to me. Sanatana further inquired, who am I? Why are the threefold miseries always giving me trouble? And finally, please tell me how I can be relieved from this material entanglement. I do not know how to question you about advancement in spiritual life, but I beg that you kindly, mercifully let me know everything I should know. This is a process of accepting a spiritual master. One should approach a spiritual master, humbly submit to him, and then inquire from him about one's spiritual progress. So these are also very important points that we've been taught that liberation generally is the goal of spiritual life. And we've discussed before what this word liberation means. It means that one is free from material attachments, material activities. But even once one is free in this way, one needs to be suitably engaged in spiritual activities. Just to try to be liberated, but not to be engaged in spiritual activities, puts one in a very precarious position. Because without being engaged in spiritual activities, one can always fall down from that liberated platform. To try and stay in the liberated state without spiritual activities is not recommended. Srila Prabhupada often quoted the unfortunate position of those who follow the impersonalist path, because they go through great trouble to relinquish all the material attachments and activities. They reach the state of liberation, but then they can't engage themselves in spiritual activities because the form of God that they are worshipping, the person Brahman, doesn't have any features that can allow them any spiritual activities. They don't have a name of his to chant. They don't have a form of his to worship. They don't have qualities of his to remember. And so they find that they want and they have to be engaged in activity because the soul is always active, but they don't have any spiritual activities really to be engaged in. So what happens is that they settle for some materially noble activities, charity and humanitarian actions. But the problem is that these are still material activities. So if they've achieved the liberated state of being free of material activities, but then they go back to material activities, no matter how noble they are, they've actually fallen down from the liberated state. And that is how they're unable to keep in the liberated state. So we can understand that if they're not even able to maintain that liberated state while they're embodied, if they attain the impersonal Brahman after they leave their body, how would they be able to remain inactive there? This is how they fall down even from that position back into the material sphere. So this is, of course, very unfortunate after being engaged in so much activity to achieve liberation. So we need to be suitably engaged in spiritual activity. And this is what the process of devotional service is. It not only relieves us of our attachments in the material sense and our activities in the material sense, but it gives us a spiritual activity so that we can maintain this transcendental liberated position. So Sanatana Goswami is saying that just being liberated is not enough. He's telling Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that I don't know who I am, but I know I should be doing something. I should be engaged in activity in my liberated state. So please tell me about this also. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is appreciating Sanatana Goswami's this great humility, because even though Sanatana Goswami is very spiritually educated, this is beside even his material education, which is quite vast, but in spiritual life, he's also vastly learned, and he's not only learned this transcendental knowledge, but he's also realized it. Yet he is coming to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and asking the Lord to enlighten him again as his spiritual master. So the point here is that we can be very knowledgeable, very well read about spiritual activities, but if we haven't heard submissively from the spiritual master on those same topics, that knowledge is not able to be transformed into the active devotional principle which will allow us to serve the Supreme Lord. So what this means is that transcendental knowledge that is gleaned on our own still has to be activated, you could say, activated into devotional service by hearing about that those matters from the spiritual master. This is why we said before that knowledge is always secondary to devotion, because knowledge is realized through process of hearing, which is one of the processes of devotional service. Whereas if we just tried to read and attain the knowledge, we would never be able to attain devotional service without being engaged in any other activity. So we also say that Krishna within the heart gives us transcendental knowledge. And this is because even if we're not able to read, but we're engaging in devotional practices, which of course will include hearing, through hearing from the spiritual master, who is the external representation of Krishna, we are able to get transcendental knowledge. So this is how the two are very, the important relationship between the two. Sri Prabhupada continues, it is the duty of a disciple to inquire about his constitutional position when approaching a spiritual master. In conformity to that process, to that spiritual process, Sanatan has already asked, what am I, and why am I suffering from the threefold miseries? The threefold miseries are Adhyatmic, Adhibhautik, and Adhidaivic. So we'll recap on these points, that the suffering of Adhyatmic is miseries that are caused by one's own body and mind. The suffering of Adhibhautik is sufferings that are caused by other living entities, insects, who cause us trouble. And Adhidaivic is miseries that are caused by supernatural factors, earthquakes and natural disasters. So if we consider the obvious, each one of us is affected by one, two, or three of these miseries. And yet the interesting thing is that people in general who want to maintain their material life and not transform into spiritual activities will generally tell you that they're very happy despite being in these miseries. And it reminds us of the story of Indra. He was once cursed to be born as a pig, and he was thus living with a family of pigs in pigsty, and he was so satisfied with his life, despite the fact that he's quite abominable and of course very miserable, that when Lord Brahma came to bring him back to heaven, everything was in disarray there, Indra refused to go back. And that is pretty much like how we are in this material world. We have access to achieving an eternal, happy spiritual kingdom, but we're so absorbed in what's happening in the big material world that we actually won't take the advice when it comes to us for our own good. Sri Prabhupada continues, Sanatan's inquiry was therefore an intelligent one. What is the position of the living entities? He asked. Why are they always undergoing these three kinds of miseries? Sanatan had admitted his weakness, although he was known by the masses of people as a greatly learned man, and he actually was a highly learned Sanskrit scholar. And although he accepted this designation, he did not know what his constitutional position was, or why he was subjected to the threefold miseries. So again, we have to note that Sanatana Goswami is an eternally liberated soul, but he's taking the position of an ordinary living entity to explain why it is that we are suffering in this way. The interesting thing is that we are probably the most world-wise generation. We have the most progressive technology, and we have access to the most information through media connection than any generation has had before us. And we're also very materially motivated. We're constantly being told that we can achieve anything, and this drives us to do so. Yet, despite whatever we may achieve, nobody can stop these three miseries. No one can guarantee that they're not going to suffer from things like accidents, floods, crime, illness, heartbreak, poverty. And when one is undergoing these sufferings, no one knows when it will end. And if it does end, no one knows when the next suffering will actually begin. Everybody is suffering, of course, to different degrees, but everyone is suffering. Sri Prabhupada continues, approaching a spiritual master is not just a fashion, but is a necessity for one who is seriously conscious of these material miseries and who wants to be free of them. It is the duty of such a person to approach a spiritual master. In this regard, we should note Arjuna's similar circumstances in Bhagavad-Gita. When he was perplexed by so many problems involving whether to fight or not, he accepted Lord Krishna as his spiritual master. As with Lord Chaitanya's instructing Sanatana Goswami, the Bhagavad-Gita is also a case of the supreme spiritual master instructing his disciple about the constitutional position of the living entity. So this is very important because, like we said earlier on, one has to approach a spiritual master to get free of these material miseries. There is no other way that any one of us can get free without that. And to set the example, Krishna has taken the position of the spiritual master to Arjuna, and he also took the position of the spiritual master as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna had started with the basics of spiritual life, instructing Arjuna that he is a spirit soul and eternal, and he does not have to be suffering these miseries. But because he has accepted the material body, that is always subject to the suffering and will eventually die, he is then condemned to be repeatedly cycling in birth and death until he is able to surrender to the Lord. And this is why Krishna's final instruction in Bhagavad Gita is about surrender, which is the only way in which we get out of the material world. And the surrender, of course, we achieve through the instruction of the spiritual master. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we learn that the Bhagavad Gita is the summary Veda. It contains the essential truths of the entire Vedas. And so it is giving us what we need to understand, even though, and because we have such limited intelligence at this stage. People don't take very kindly to being told that we have less intelligence than before. Like we said, with everyone thinking that we're so technologically advanced, we have access to so much information so easily, why would we consider ourselves as intelligent? But the reality is that the reason why we need so much information available at our fingertips, whether on the internet or otherwise, is because we cannot retain information for very long. And that is because of limited intelligence. Previous generations were able to remember things more easily, and they're able to apply them more effectively. As the age of Kali Yuga is progressing, our ability to do that is diminishing. And therefore, we see that we need to have so much information available in other ways. So it's not a cause for our advancement to say that we're able to use gadgets and devices. It's not a marker of our increased intelligence that we actually need these devices and all the information they provide for us. It's actually serving as a substitute for our real intelligence and memory that are greatly diminished, as the Srimad Bhagavatam says. And that is why in the past we understand that scripture wasn't written. There wasn't any need. The people were able to understand and retain information and apply it practically in their lives. I don't think anyone who considers themselves intelligent today could actually remember the Bhagavad Gita after hearing it just once, or to speak of the entire Vedas. So the Bhagavad Gita is known as the summary Veda, and because it is containing the summary of all the Vedic teachings, those Vedic teachings are explained in the Bhagavad Gita as well. Thus, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna about the Jnana Yoga, of the body and soul, of the way the material nature is being conducted, of the three modes of material nature. He also explains about Ashtanga Yoga, how one uses meditation in order to realize the super soul. He explains about Karma Yoga, how one can engage in work and thus be free of material reactions, make spiritual progress. And in all of that, he's also explaining about Bhakti Yoga, although it is the most important part of the Bhagavad-Gita because it is presented alongside other topics. The tendency of people is to see Bhakti Yoga as just another part alongside Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga, and they think, unfortunately, that they have the ability to choose which path they want, which is a similar thing that they try to do with the Vedic teachings as well. So the reality, though, is that just like with the Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining just that the goal of all these processes is to get to him, and that Bhakti Yoga is easiest and the most sublime way to do that. And so the intelligent person is supposed to be able to understand after going through all this other knowledge of these other processes that indeed Bhakti Yoga is the natural choice for anybody who wants to attain Krishna. Because at the end of the day, that's the goal of the Vedas and therefore Bhagavad Gita, to attain Krishna. But unfortunately, people don't understand this point easily. They get too distracted and confused with all these different paths. And because of that, they're very less likely, especially in this age conditioned with passion and ignorance, to actually realize that Krishna is the goal. And so this is why Srila Vyasadeva had to take that essence, the highest knowledge of the Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, and expand it in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Srimad Bhagavatam is only about Bhakti Yoga. It's only about how to attain Krishna. It's only about Krishna. And so in this way, there is no confusion. There are no other paths that are discussed. There are no other options, actually, because the best and only option is given. So Srila Prabhupada expands on this point further so we can apply it to our context. As the Srimad Bhagavatam, the book Bhagavat, is giving us only the most vital knowledge about Bhakti Yoga and Krishna. So the person Bhagavat, the devotee Bhagavat, who is equal to this book Bhagavat, is also giving us the knowledge only of Bhakti Yoga and only Krishna. And of course, the foremost of all devotee Bhagavats is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we see that unlike Krishna, who had to explain all these other paths to Arjuna, Lord Chaitanya is only explaining about Bhakti Yoga and about Krishna, just like the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Krishna, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he has to give the free will to the living entities that he does through the Vedas, through the Bhagavad Gita. He has to explain Karma Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga and Bhakti Yoga through the Vedas, of course, in the beginning of creation, to Brahma, to Arjuna through the Bhagavad Gita. And Lord Chaitanya, however, when he appears as a devotee, is even more merciful than Krishna, because he doesn't confuse us with all these other paths. Let's just take Bhakti Yoga. And this is why we say that surrendering to Krishna or trying to approach Krishna directly is a lot more difficult than if we approach him through the devotee. Of course, he is a devotee as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When we accept the lotus feet of the devotee and surrender to the devotee, then we attain Krishna more easily than we approach Krishna directly. So Lord Chaitanya is now taking up from Krishna's teachings of at the end of Bhagavad Gita, where he said, just surrender unto me. Lord Chaitanya is saying, take to Bhakti Yoga and I'll teach you how to surrender to Krishna. This is what he's doing. So in order to begin his teachings to Sanatana Goswami, Lord Chaitanya is reiterating the salient points of Bhagavad Gita in relation to the body and soul. He says, your constitutional position is that you are pure living soul, the Lord told Sanatana. Your material body is not your real self, nor is your mind your real identity, nor your intelligence, nor your false ego. Your identity is that of an eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord Krishna. Your position is that you are transcendental. The superior energy of Krishna is spiritual in constitution, and the inferior external energy is material. Since you are in between the material energy and the spiritual energy, your position is marginal. Belonging to the marginal potency of Krishna, you are simultaneously one with and different from. Because you are spirit, you are not different from Krishna. But because you are only a minute particle of Krishna, you are different from him. So this is the Achintya Bheda Tattva, which is a synthesis of all the philosophies of the Vaishnava Sampradayas that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has granted us. And this is the Tattva philosophy given to our Gaudiya tradition that we must all be aware of. All transcendental knowledge actually goes from this. And Lord Chaitanya and Srila Prabhupada are giving us more analogies to understand this better. This simultaneous oneness and difference always exists in the relationship between the living entities and the Supreme Lord. From the fact that the living entities are always in a marginal position, this concept of simultaneously one and different can be understood. The living entity is just like a molecular particle of sunshine, whereas Krishna is like the blazing sun itself. Lord Chaitanya also compared the living entities to sparks in a fire, and the Supreme Lord to the blazing fire itself. In this connection, the Lord cited a verse from Vishnu Purana. Everything manifested within this cosmic world is but the energy of the Supreme Lord. As fire situated in one place spreads its illumination and heat all around, so the Lord, although situated in one place in the spiritual world, manifests his different energies everywhere. Indeed, the whole cosmic creation is but a manifestation of its various energies. Lord Chaitanya continued citing the Vishnu Purana. The Supreme Lord's original energy is transcendental and spiritual, and the living entities are part and parcel of that energy. There is a third energy, however, called the material energy, which is covered by the cloud of ignorance. This energy, which is material nature, is divided into three modes of gunas: goodness, passion, and ignorance. So these energies of Krishna are carrying out all the functions of the spiritual and material world. We know that there's the internal potency that runs the activities of the spiritual world, and the external potency runs the activities of the material world. And we, as the marginal energies in between the two, means that we can either fall under the control of the spiritual energy or the material energy. It doesn't mean that we can either be spiritual in nature or material in nature, because the spirit soul is never ever material. A spirit soul, of course, just by definition, is always spiritual. The problem is its nature is affected by whose control it's under. So when that marginal living entity is coming under the material control, he thinks himself material, and he gets immediately covered by these three modes. So what's interesting about the modes is that it colors us so much that we don't even know what our real personalities are. This is what makes Sanatana Goswami's inquiry about who I am even more pertinent. We may think that we have a personality that's made up of certain traits. Some people like sleeping a lot, but they don't realize that that's because of ignorance. Some people consider themselves very fiery in nature, but that's actually because of the mode of passion. Some people consider themselves very peaceful, but that's because of the mode of goodness. And the thing is, nobody is ever static in these modes. The modes are always competing for control over the living entity, as Krishna explains in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita, which means that one can be peaceful and consider themselves peaceful, and then all of a sudden somebody does something and that person just explodes in anger. The mode of passion has won. And somebody who's lazy can, of course, change their nature and try to become more active, and then they're coming under the control of the mode of passion, and so it goes on and on like that. So what we tend to be is an amalgam of these modes, and that produces so many different types of reactions that we don't actually even know who we are and how we're responding at any given point in time. This is the interesting thing about being under the control of the modes of material nature. The Lord also said that the living entity is known as the Kshetradya, or the knower of the field of activities. This is confirmed in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, where Krishna describes the body as the field of activities and the living entity as the Kshetradya, the knower of that field. So The material body is called the field of activity, and we, the spirit souls within that body, are supposed to know this field. We're supposed to know our own body. And whereas superficially we may know what our body looks like, and we may know what it's composed of, at least to some degree, we don't even know what it's capable of. So this is more evidence for how we don't know who we are. We don't know our personality, and we don't know our body either, even though we're supposed to be knowers of our field. So why do we say we don't know what we're capable of? We only using what we think we should be using this body for in the first place. By using it for sense gratification, we're actually not utilizing the body for what it's meant for, since the body, like everything else in the material world, is designed for us to be engaging in devotional service so we can actually be free of the material world. And by engaging in devotional service under that spiritual nature, we actually find that the capabilities of the body become greater. So how do we understand this? So most of us know that there's a common adage that we only use a small percentage of our brain power. His Holiness Ram Govinda Swami Maharaj recently was explaining that that is true. That somebody who is very spiritually elevated and, of course, engaging in devotional service purely, like Srila Prabhupada, is able to utilize their brain to a much greater degree. And he gave a very nice example. Srila Prabhupada was translating all the scriptures around the time that the internet and database was not available. Yet he was traveling across the world without so many references. Yet in his purports, he has quoted multiple references. Prabhupada was writing constantly. How was he able to have access to all these references? He was using his extraordinary brain power. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada also comments on this pastime of Narada becoming spiritually enlivened after having darshan of the Lord, that each of his limbs was separately enlivened. And Srila Prabhupada says that means that when one is rendering devotional service in ecstasy, each of the limbs is able to acquire its full function, a function that we actually don't have any understanding of when we utilize the limbs for material activity. So this is how we don't even know what our bodies are. Knowledge of the living entity's true position is possessed to different extents by different types of living entities. In other words, it is to be understood that the living entity is part and parcel of the spiritual energy of the Lord. Because the material energy is inferior, man has the ability to get free from the coverings of this material energy and utilize the spiritual energy. It is stated in the Bhagavad-Gita that in the conditioned state, the superior energy, the living entity, is covered by the inferior energy. Due to this covering, the living entity is subjected to the miseries of the material world, and in proportion to how much he is covered, suffers material miseries. Those who are a little enlightened suffer less, but on the whole, everyone is subjected to material miseries due to being covered by the material energy. So there's a common saying that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So what this means is that we're all going to be subjected to miseries being in the material world. But if one is able to overcome the connotation of these sufferings and turn these into an advantage, which is of course what spiritual life actually teaches us, then one actually doesn't need to suffer. And it is actually only in devotional service that one can go through all these difficulties and not find them suffering. So, for example, if we have somebody cutting us off in traffic, we can decide that that's suffering. We can get angry. We could express road rage. That's great extreme. That would really lead to suffering. We could let it ruin our day. We could go home and we could upset everybody else because we're bad. But if we could decide that that's not suffering, if we decide that it's just Krishna testing us, if we take those few seconds after we've been cut off to just think of Krishna intensely, even if we're really struggling to do it, and with our sincerity, Krishna would respond and help us by being present in our mind, then we're turning this potential condition of suffering into something transcendental because now we remember the Lord. And it's a simple principle with some mental discipline that we could apply to a lot of conditions in this world. Because as we said, this material world, this material body, all the situations are designed for us to be able to engage in service with Krishna and then attain to help us get out of this world. That means that all these challenges that are coming to us are helping us. They're supposed to help us in order to aid us in thinking of Krishna more, depending on Krishna more, getting his mercy and getting more purified so that we can actually achieve him. So if you think about it in that way, nothing is actually suffering. It's just a matter of how we approach it. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also quoted from the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, in which it is stated that earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego all combine to form the inferior energy of the Lord. So even though these energies all belong to Krishna, because of our false ego, we think that all the energies of this world, the earth, fire, water, air, ether, as well as our own intelligence and mind, are there for us to utilize for what we want to do. And that's why we have this motivation: work hard, work smart, and try and gain as much as possible, and then enjoy all these elements in forms, holidays, movie theaters, any other pleasure. Basically, all the energies can combine to form anything. But what we have to realize at the end of the day is that all these energies belong to Krishna. And it's Krishna who decides what we actually get from our hard work or from working smart. We are actually not in control of that at all. Nobody can get any more or any less than what Krishna desires for them, no matter how hard they try, or even if they don't try at all. It's quite an illusion for us to think that we're in control of all the elements of material nature. But the superior energy is the real identity of the living being, and it is because of that energy that the whole material world functions. The cosmic manifestation, which is made of the material elements, has no power to act unless it is moved by the superior energy of the living entity. The conditioned life of the living entity is due to forgetfulness of his relationship with the Supreme Lord in the superior energy. When that relationship is forgotten, conditioned life is the result. Only when a man revives his real identity as the eternal servitor to the Lord does he become liberated. So we may wonder, the previous paragraph we said that the living entity can never control the material energy. But now we're saying that the whole material energy is being moved because of the living entity. So what does that mean? So we know that Krishna is the ultimate creator, maintainer, destroyer of the material energy. So it is he who is always controlling it. But when the living entity has a desire, and Krishna, exerting his control, gives the living entity the ability to fulfill that desire, then material energy becomes activated to fulfill that desire. So this is how material nature, although inert, is actually able to act. It acts because the living entity is in contact with it, and because the Lord is controlling everything, the Lord gives sanction to the desire of the living entity, and material nature becomes active in relation to that desire. Otherwise, the material energy can't do anything on its own. The thing is, the material qualities also can't change either. So when the living entity is doing or desiring things for itself, the material energy can act, but the result is always suffering. The material energy can't change that the result will always be suffering. However, if the living entity desires something spiritual, then the material energy is transformed by the power of Krishna's will into the spiritual energy. And that spiritual energy is very different. The spiritual energy is not inert at all. The spiritual energy is fully conscious, and therefore the spiritual energy can stop our sufferings and put us in touch with Krishna. And this will allow us to attain liberation from all material miseries. So this is where Srila Prabhupada ends this third chapter of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. In the next chapter, he discusses further the teachings of Lord Chaitanya and Goswami, and we'll discuss that next week. Thank you all so much for your kind attention. Shri Krishna Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Are there any questions?
Hare Krishna, dear Mataji. Thank you very much for wonderful class. What is my realizing from this class is even the demigods are not ready for hearing and for take knowledge from Srimad Bhagavatam, as Shukadev Goswami in the first chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam told what is a nectar or a cup of nectar which was brought from these demigods and give to Parikshit Maharaj to drink in compared with transcendental knowledge, because they devoid devotional service, and there's a meaning only best for us is to be engaged in devotion service. Thank you very much, dear Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji, for that. You're absolutely right. That's why it said that the demigods have to actually take birth the earthly plane in order to engage in devotional service. Their environments in the heavenly planets are just not conducive to this engaging in service to Krishna. It's too much pleasure for them to be able to do that effectively. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions, comments, realizations?
Krishna Maji, thank you for the wonderful class. Maybe we can request we can request Sarvanga Mataji. She's online with us. Kriras Mataji. Would like to share any realization, Mataji? If you can please unmute.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you for the lovely class, Gaura, Premi. Much appreciated. And yeah, I actually joined quite late, so I'll listen to the recording later on.
Thank you, still. Thank you so much for your association.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Nav Kishori Mataji. Hare Krishna. Would like to share
Hare
anything?
Krishna,
Thank you for joining us.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Mataji. I like to share the one Padurta Mataji said, like Lord Chaitanya started the Sankirtana Yagna, and by chanting and hearing the holy name of the Lord, we can also progress in our devotional practice. And Lord Chaitanya, the way he showed us devotional path, we can go ahead, and we can go in a Vaikuntha Loka also. Thank you so much for beautiful class, dear Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Shwanji. Thank you for the service. Thank you for your wonderful comment. You're absolutely right. I'm so fortunate to have Lord Chaitanya in this party. Okay. We can, there's no other questions. We can sing bhajan by Narottam Das Thakur. Srila Prabhupada really loved this bhajan. He quoted it very often because it's the reality of the miseries of material life. And it's also about the wonderful Sankirtan of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that's descended from Goloka Vrindavan to rescue us all. Hari Hari Bipale Jana Koi Hari Hari Bipale Jana Koi Manushya Janama Paya Radha Krishna Pajiya Manushya Janama Paya Radha Krishna Pajiya Janiya Juniya Vishagayu Janiya Juniya Vishagayu Golokera Premadhana Harinama Sankirtana Golokera Premadhana Harinama Sankirtana Ratina Janamino Hemita Ratina Janamino Hemita Sankaradishanale Divani Shiyatwale Sankaradishanale Divani Shiyatwale Churaite na koi no pae Churaite na koi no pae Rajendra Nandana Jai Sachi Sutta Vero Se Rajendra Nandana Jai Sachi Sutta Vero Se Balaram Hoilo Nitai Balaram Hoilo Nitai Vinayana Jata Chilo Harinama Udarilo Hina Jata Chilo Harinama Udarilo Sarasati Jadai Madhai Sarasati Jadai Madhai Aha Prabhu Nanda Sutta Vishabhanu Sutta Chitta Aha Prabhu Nanda Sutta Vishabhanu Sutta Chitta Koruna Karo Hoya Boro Koruna Karo Hoya Boro Narkama Dasakar Nateri Oranga Pai Narkama Dasakar Nateri Oranga Pai Tumajina Kya Kya Amara Tum bina kaise hamara, tum bina kaise hamara, tum bina kaise hamara. Hari Hari Vipale Jana Koi Hari Hari Vipale Janama Goi. So the translation is, O Lord Hari, I have spent my life uselessly, having obtained a human birth and having not worshipped Radha and Krishna, I have knowingly drunk poison. The treasure of divine love in Goloka Vrindavan has descended as the congregational chanting of Lord Hari's holy names. Why did my attraction for that chanting never come about? Day and night my heart burns from the fire of the poison of worldliness, and I have not taken the means to retrieve it. Lord Krishna, who is the son of the king of Raja, became the son of Sachi, Lord Chaitanya, and Balaram became Nitai. The holy name delivered all those souls who were lowly and wretched. The two sinners, Jagai and Madaya, are evidence of this. O Lord Krishna, son of Nanda, accompanied by the daughter of Rishabhanu, please be merciful to me now. Narottam Das says, O Lord, please do not push me away from your reddish lotus feet, for who is my beloved except for you? Narottam Das, ki jai, Shishtai, ki jai. Okay, so thank you all so very much for your kind attention, for joining us this week. Please join us next week when we're going to continue these wonderful teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami. Shri Santai Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Santai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hari Bol.